Hello and welcome back. Today I will take a look at the Derwent Academy watercolor pencils, a portrait set. I wasn't really planning on buying new art supplies, but I've had this set in my wish list for a while. They were sold out, so I got a notification once they were back, and it's a bit tricky sometimes to find a dedicated skin color set. So I was quite interested in these, and they are also quite a steal. The regular Derwent watercolor pencils are almost twice as expensive for a set of 12 pencils, but this one is just 11 euros. This price difference is mainly due to the fact that these are academy pencils instead of professional pencils, so they are meant more as a hobby line of products. But I wanted to use these to practice portrait sketching, so I figured these would be just fine. You can tell by the packaging that these are a bit cheaper though. Listen to this. So the packaging isn't the greatest, but if you take them out of it, it doesn't matter anymore. Also, since these are the Academy line instead of the professional line, they also look a bit less fancy than the other ones. You can see here that the writing is not very clear on some of these, and the barrels are not fully painted, so you can see the wood, and in some cases the wood looks a bit grayish. This is most obvious on the black and the white pencil. Since wood is a natural product, I feel like a bit of a snob to complain about this though. Anyhow, let's get into the swatching. I'm using a back page in my Etchr Lab sketchbook. This is a 100% cotton sketchbook, and the paper that I'm using is hot pressed, which means that it has very little texture. I applied all of the pencils first and later went over them with a wet brush. I wanted to see if any of the pencil lines would remain, because I actually don't want them to be visible once I'm using water on them. The colors in the set are mainly made up of earth tones and a couple of reds. The brightest colors are cream and sand, but they both lean a bit yellow. Next up are the reds. We get rose, which is very orange, bright pink and carmine red. They are followed by terracotta, yellow ochre, raw umber, burnt umber, grey, black and white. In order to swatch the white pencil, I applied a bit of black marker first. Now I'm going in with my water brush, and you can see that the cream almost completely disappears. The sand is really quite yellow, but turned out relatively usable later on. And rose is a super warm orange. I'm actually not sure if I'll be using that one on a face or not. I ended up using bright pink and carmine red for lips, but I think you could also use a tiny bit of carmine red to apply a bit of color to cheeks. Terracotta is a really nice brown and exactly what I was hoping for from this set. Next up we get yellow ochre and raw umber, but they look quite similar to sand, so you've got 3 yellowish colors in here. Burnt umber for a bit of darker browns, and grey are quite nice to have though. The black also looks good. The white, I'm not sure if I used it wrong, but it might as well not be there. It turned really muddy and grey. You might notice here, as well as in my speed painting, that these colors look a bit grainy, but this is mostly because of the paper. I will have a second speed painting in this video where you can see these pencils on a different kind of paper. Here is my reference image from Pinterest. I figured since I mostly have yellows, browns and reds, this should be doable if I stick only to the colors included in the set. And this is my sketch in my Etchr Lab sketchbook. So it's the same kind of paper as the one that I swatched these colors on. I've reviewed this sketchbook recently if you're interested. This was my first time using watercolor pencils, so I wasn't quite sure where to start. I normally don't start with the eyes, but after I'd done the first pupil, I just filled in some colors for the rest of her face, as well as her second pupil. It looked really bad to me until I started wetting the pencil with my brush. Over time, I started to really enjoy this kind of process, especially because I could work in sections at a time, and it felt like this medium does not rush you. I was not worried about getting any hard edges if I didn't work fast enough. The moment when you wet your pencil marks and they turn into smooth watercolor is also really nice and satisfying to watch. This painting turned out fairly light because I was unsure how dark I should apply my pencil marks, but I really like the softness of the overall look of this painting. You can also see here how the reds were quite useful for the color of her lips. Her hair and headscarf were also really fun to paint, and it felt like this went rather fast in comparison to what I was expecting. I've used regular pencils before and I definitely would have needed more time to apply it smoothly and make sure that it covers the paper evenly, but such carefulness is really not needed here. Overall, I found this process very satisfying. I ended up buying more watercolor pencils and I would actually recommend getting more with this skin set as well, because on its own the skin set is relatively yellow leaning and it also would limit you to people with brown eyes basically, or I guess red eyes. So getting a green, a blue and maybe a few more browns would be ideal. I still love the way this turned out, even with the limited palette. There is also a softness here that I usually don't have in my artwork. So this is the finished piece. Like I said, there's a certain graininess here, but I've watched another YouTuber recently who uses watercolor pencils a lot and she recommended giving them a try on Etchr's hot pressed paper. So I transferred my sketch to some Etchr's hot pressed paper using a light box. Etchr's paper is very well known, but most people prefer the cold pressed surface, and it's really good, but the hot pressed one just dries very fast, so a lot of people struggle with it, and my block of hot press paper has been lying in a corner for quite some time as well. This time around I felt more comfortable applying a lot of the watercolor pencils in a thick layer before I went in with my brush. I had also bought more of them, so I had a greater selection of colors available to me, but this will mostly come into play when I get around to drawing or painting her scarf. I ended up buying a bunch of Faber-Castell watercolor pencils, but I do have to say the difference between these and the cheaper Derwent skin set watercolor pencils is not too big. I was still able to achieve quite dark and saturated tones with the Derwent pencils, despite them being half of the price. But I did switch out the black because the Faber-Castell black had a softer, warmer tone that I preferred to the Derwent black. If you're wondering which one is which, you can tell by the barrels of the watercolor pencils. The Derwent pencils have the wooden barrels and the Faber-Castell ones have a painted barrel. In a moment here you will see me wet her hair, and this is one of the moments that felt so deeply satisfying while working on this painting. There were similar moments to this when I was working on her scarf, especially because I'd bought a proper red in the meantime, and this really helped to make the colors more punchy and interesting. I did make some beginner watercolor pencil mistakes here as well. When I got to the top part of her scarf, I applied the pencils in a second layer before the first layer had dried, and this will result in pencil marks that you can no longer lift or re-wet, and you will be able to see some strong marks there later on. I tried to cover it up, but you can still see it if you know what you're looking for. Here is the final painting, and I will compare it side by side to the one in my sketchbook. You can see the one on the right side has a lot more intense colors, and I think this is partially because I felt more confident, but also because the paper on the right side is more suitable for watercolor pencils. I know that I use the Derwent pencils for her eyes, her lips, her cheeks, and the left side of her scarf. But in terms of the saturation or richness of the colors, there's really barely a difference between these and the Faber-Castell watercolor pencils. Even though the Derwent watercolor pencils are the Academy line and the Faber-Castell ones are a professional line. So all in all, this set really is a steal for the money. But I still think the color selection could be a bit stronger, and you would definitely need to buy a couple more watercolor pencils to make up for the gaps in the selection. What did you think of these speed paintings, and have you tried watercolor pencils before? Personally, I think the one on the left side has the stronger drawing, but I like the colors on the right side more. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.